Bryan Stevenson is a real-life superhero. If you ever met him, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was an honor to portray him in Just Mercy, and I feel blessed to be able to shine a larger light on the work he's doing through the Equal Justice Initiative. It has had a positive, often life-changing effect on thousands of underrepresented people, and his organization continues to provide a voice for those whose voices often can't be heard.
EJI is the Equal Justice Initiative. We started in 1989 in Montgomery, Alabama, with just 4 or 5 people, and today we are a national human rights organization that provides legal services to the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. Coming into the world, I had no idea that I would ever be a lawyer. I started my education in a colored school. Things were still racially segregated, and they opened up the public schools. And it was a real journey for me and my family to enter this world we had been largely excluded from. I had an amazing mother who valued reading. She got us books even when they didn't have the money for books. My mom went in debt to buy the World Book Encyclopedia so her children would have this portal to a larger world. And what breaks my heart with kids today is that I go into a lot of communities where 12 and 13-year-old children tell me they don't expect to be free by the time they're 21. There is this expectation of incarceration, and it's not made up. That's just what they see in their communities. And if 50, 60, 70% of the boys of color in their neighborhood get arrested and sent to jails and prisons, it's very hard to not expect that for yourself.
You rich boy from Harvard, you don't know what it is down here. When you're guilty from the moment you're born, they have no fingerprints, no evidence, and none of that matter when all y'all think is I look like a man who could kill somebody.
I wanted to create a nonprofit law office because I think in the American legal system, there's a tremendous need for reform. Over the last half century, we're seeing this retreat from a presumption of innocence by presumptions of guilt that gets assigned to Black and brown people, that get assigned to poor people, to vulnerable people. So for me, I believe we could create a law practice that could have an impact on the lives of the poor and the condemned, even though there was no precedent for that.
All charges against you are dismissed, Mr. McMillan.
In the beginning, we focused exclusively on death penalty cases. Then we realized that inequality and injustice was much bigger than just what happens to people who are condemned. And so we started representing people who were serving long sentences for minor crimes, children prosecuted as adults, cases involving people who are mentally ill. We represent innocent people all over America. There are real disparities in resources in this country when it comes to access to lawyers. Most states have public defender systems where a whole network of lawyers exists to help the poor. There are many states, like Alabama, that don't have public defenders. And I began the work there because it was a crisis. We had people literally dying for legal assistance. They couldn't get the help they needed. I do believe there's great work going on in this country to advance social justice in New York or DC or LA, but that's not the only place where problems exist. We have huge challenges in the American South, in rural parts of this country. So EJI is based in Montgomery, Alabama, and we believe that if we can do justice work there, there are very few places that can claim that it can't happen where they are. For me, it's important that the folks who work at EJI put the interests of our clients before our interests. I'm really privileged to work with extraordinary people who are all mission-driven. They could be making a lot more money, working in much more comfortable circumstances, but they care deeply about justice and work each day to increase the justice quotient in America. We want to end mass incarceration and excessive punishment, and we want to change the narrative with regard to this country's history of racial inequality. I don't think most people realize how our criminal justice system, and the death penalty in particular, has been defined by error. For every 10 people we've executed in this country, we've now identified one innocent person on death row. It's a shocking rate of error. And I don't think people appreciate how race plays a critical role in that situation.
Why did you stop me?
We're letting you go. You should be happy.
Enslavement has created this narrative of racial difference that makes it easy for us to accept the guilt and culpability of people of color. Lynching and terrorism has created a predisposition to using lethal violence and extreme punishment against Black and brown people without considering whether that punishment is justified. This era of segregation has made communities of color vulnerable to excessive violence by the police, abuse of power by courts. And I just think we've been indifferent to the problems in our system, and we've got to do something about these problems. Recently, we've begun work to change the way we talk and think about the legacy of racial bias. And so we've opened a museum called the Legacy Museum, From Enslavement to Mass Incarceration, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which tries to sensitize the nation to the era of lynching and racial terrorism. Both of those institutions are in Montgomery, and I hope you'll come and visit us there. What I love about the movie is that it brings to life the human toll of inequality and injustice. When you get to see the burden on clients up close and the burden on families of people, when you understand the inhumanity of strapping someone into an electric chair, when you begin to appreciate the burden that is created by injustice.
If we can look at ourselves closely and honestly, I believe we will see that we all need justice. We all need mercy.
And that's what I hope this film brings to light with the kind of extraordinary performances that are presented here, to really humanize the nature of this struggle. This is not just data or statistics, it's human beings every day being caught up in a system that is brutal and unfair. And with that knowledge, I hope people learn that they can make a difference, that being hopeful is critical. And even when it's difficult and overwhelming, we have to find a way to keep fighting. To create a healthier community, a better society, we have to sometimes be willing to do things that are uncomfortable and inconvenient if we want to change the world. And if just a few people do that, I have no doubt that we can create more justice in the spaces where we live. We've got a lot of work to do in this country to recover from this epidemic of incarceration that has led to 6 million people being on probation and parole, 70 million people having criminal arrests. So there has to be a generation of people who come forward and fight and do justice. I think about the people who were doing the kind of work I'm doing now 60 years ago, and they frequently had to say, "My head is bloodied but not bowed." They did so much more with so much less that I'm humbled by what can be accomplished. It does inspire me to keep pushing, to find ways to make a difference, to tear down some of these barriers that block and impede the progress of communities that are at risk and vulnerable. Well, I'm especially proud that we're still doing it. I started my career over 35 years ago and didn't have a lot of money to do the work we're trying to do. We didn't know whether we would be able to sustain this work. And here we are 35 years later. We now have a staff of 150 people. And it gives me great pride to know that a community of people have answered the call to do justice. And I'm really proud of the institution and its evolution, but also really excited about the things we have yet to do that I hope we can still achieve.